What's up, buddy?
All right. The other day, you opened Stefan Molyneux's book on stream, and you went to the difference between logical and true section.
Yeah.
And you had a criticism of his use of the word sound.
Yeah, because it's incorrect.
Okay. Could you pull up the book real quick?
Why? I remember it. Why? What do you want me to pull up?
Okay, it's fine. So, Stefan says, all men are immortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. And he says the structure remains logically sound. He doesn't say the argument is logically sound. So he's not using it in the philosophical sense that you know. Like when a philosopher says an argument is sound, right? He says that the premises are true, number one, and number two, that the conclusion follows from the premises. But he's not saying the argument is sound. He's saying the structure is logically sound.
Do you know anything about music?
Sure, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I play guitar.
Do you know a decent amount of theory?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say that I have an 80 measure piece, okay? Let's say that for some measure, okay? Let's say that the whole piece is in the key of C, okay? But in some measure, let's say that we play like an F, B flat, E flat, or whatever, or something like real quick, right? A quick 2-5-1 or whatever, right? If somebody were to say to me like, "Oh, that measure, like that's in the key of E flat," right? That phrasing would be very odd, and if I were to hear somebody say that, I would immediately think like, "Okay, I understand what you're trying to say, but that's not really how you would ever say that. You would never describe a quick 2-5-1 as a key change. That's just not what a key change is at all. If you say something is in a certain key, you're very, very oftentimes speaking about the entire piece itself. You would never, ever, ever refer to a very quick, even if it was a modulation. Well, no, a modulation would, but if it was a quick 2-5-1, you would never refer to this as a key change, right? This is in a different key. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Right? So when you're writing a book on philosophy, one of the most pedantic things of all time, right? Very semantic, very pedantic, very much using the correct terms, right? And you were trying to introduce beginners to philosophy. Why would you ever use a word like sound that has a very, very, very well understood meaning to describe something that is not sound?
But the meaning you're talking about is when you say the argument is sound.
Yes.
Like when you're calling the argument
but do you
itself
understand
sound.
do you understand how confusing it would be to a new person to say like, "Oh, this argument here, it's logically sound, but it's not sound." That doesn't
Stefan
mean anything.
You and I both know Stefan isn't an academic philosopher, first of all, right?
Okay, but philosophy is very rigorous in its usages of terms and
Okay,
ideas.
yeah.
Understand
But
what I'm saying.
I'm being rigorous right now. Like the way he said sound is not in reference to the argument, so he's not incorrect. Even in with the definition you and I know.
No,
and
but
academic philosophers know.
the problem is that he's not even wrong because he's using a phrase that doesn't make sense. What does logically sound mean? The word he was looking for was valid. That is the word. And if you were to go and open a philosophical textbook, they would never define valid as meaning something that's logically sound. Now here's what sound means, but not that sound. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Well, we can just go off the dictionary definition of sound.
I don't care about the dictionary definition. We're talking about a very well understood philosophical term.
Yeah, if you say the argument is sound, though.
But why would you say, what does logically sound
mean?
If
he
what
said
does logically
the argument
sound
is
mean?
logically sound, he'd be wrong. I fully admit, but he didn't say that.
Hold on, let me bring up, just so I can look at the... Why would you use the phrase, the structure remains logically sound? Why wouldn't you say the argument is valid?
Can I just say the dictionary definition of sound?
I don't care about the dictionary definition. We're not talking about the dictionary because that's not what we're talking about. The point that I was bringing up was that this guy is fucking retarded. Why wouldn't you say, if you knew what you were talking... First of all, I don't even know what the difference between logical and true is. It's trying to sound like he's trying to talk about the difference between the validity and the soundness of an argument, but maybe he's not aware of that. But if an argument being sound means a very particular thing, and an argument being valid means exactly what he's trying to say, why wouldn't he say, this argument is valid? but unsound.
But he didn't say that. That's my entire point.
No, he uses a
He
bunch
didn't
of
say
other
the argument
words.
is sound.
He uses a bunch of other words that makes me wonder what if he has any
he has
background.
no background in philosophy.
Then why does he call himself the leading philosopher who's going to save Western civilization? Don't you think that's kind of weird?
He's a fucking enlightened rogue philosopher. But I just don't see the error he's made. He hasn't said anything that's just wrong by definition.
Let's contextualize this, okay? The problem is that he's writing a book that's supposed to introduce the layman to philosophy. This is why I was never even going to look at this book ever, because I looked at the table of context, and it looks like he wants to give like an Intro to Philosophy 101 class, which is fine. And a section on deductive reasoning. Okay, sure, yeah, this is fine. But the problem is that when you dig into this, you would have to discard everything. If you wanted to learn anything about philosophy, you couldn't read this book. You would have to forget everything.
I don't think you'd be reading Stefan Molyneux in the first place to learn about philosophy.
Okay, but that's the problem.
It's very clear that this is a political book. It's not. But he's just trying to push his agenda.
But that's not what he markets it at. He's talking about the argument. He's talking about ruthless objectivity. Let me read the intro. The first thing to understand is that the argument is everything. It's civilization. It's peace. It's love. It's truth and beauty. The argument is life itself. The argument is a rational map that allows us to navigate a need in reality. It keeps us sane by reminding us of facts and reason and evidence. It sounds like he wants to give you a pretty rigorous introduction to philosophy, and some of these, he uses some words that seem like...
But, if we're just going by the definitions of the words, he hasn't said anything wrong.
Okay. I mean, if this is how you want to analyze... But the point is retarded. The problem is that what you're saying is fucking stupid. Sound, and if I were to describe to you, right, a valid argument is one whose structure is internally consistent. A sound argument is one whose premises are correct, and then the conclusion logically follows. And then you were to describe to me an unsound argument and call it a structure that is logically sound, I would look at you why would you use that word? That doesn't make... why would you say...
Just means, it means in good condition and not damaged.
Okay, well, that's not what
the structure is not damaged.
Sound,
do you agree?
But sound has a very particular meaning in philosophy. Sound means something. You would never take something. Okay, but that's the problem. That's the problem that I have with the book.
Academic.
That's the problem that I have with the book, is that it presents itself as some type of intro to philosophy. I'm going to introduce you to my rigorous understanding of philosophy, but then he doesn't understand very basic. This is This isn't even philosophy 101. This is you go to a wiki page and you read this in 2 seconds.
My whole point is that he said nothing factually incorrect here.
Okay.
An academic could read this and recognize that he hasn't made any errors.
I don't think so. I don't agree. But if you can find somebody like a master's student or whatever...
You probably know some PhDs in philosophy, right?
Yeah, but most of them that watch my stream probably hate Stefan, so you would argue that they're biased. I would have a very hard time believing that a student of philosophy would read somebody saying that the structure remains logically sound, and they would go, oh, he doesn't mean sound in this way, but the way that he said it is okay.
Because he didn't say the argument is sound.
But the problem is you're
he
using
used it in a different context, so we have to assume that he's not using it.
No, but why would you confuse a student that way? If I were to add on to the sentence, the structure remains logically sound, but the argument is not sound. That's so confusing. When we have words to say this, this argument is valid but unsound. That is so much more clear. It's valid because it's internally consistent. It's unsound because the first premise is false. These are words that have very strict meanings, very well-understood meanings that will be repeated throughout your entire life of philosophy. People will say them over and over. Why would you use logically sound? I don't even know what that phrase means. What is logically sound? Is there something that's illogically sound? Why does he even have logical as a qualifier here? It's literally lay federative. What?
He means it's not he means when he says this, he's just saying the argument is valid, by the way you know.
Then why not say valid?
Because it means the same thing.
Logically sound. What does logically mean? What does logic mean here? That's a meaningless word. It's a fedora tipper word. The structure remains logically sound. What does logically mean here? It
means that the conclusion follows from the premises.
Oh. What's the word for that?
Valid. But he hasn't said anything wrong.
But... okay, it's not even wrong. That's the problem, is that it's not really wrong, but it's not saying anything. The structure remains logically sound. But that doesn't mean anything. What does logically sound mean? Do you understand?
There's nothing wrong with the structure of the argument.
So it's
regardless
valid.
of whether the premise is right or wrong. Yeah,
so it's valid. That's the word you're looking for.
That sentence
Logically sound doesn't mean anything. It's wrong. It's stupid. It's meaningless to have it in here.
It's not wrong, though.
It's not even wrong. It's just dumb. If you remove logically, the whole sentence falls apart. The structure remains sound. That wouldn't probably be true. And logically, it doesn't work. What does logically mean here? To add as a modifier that makes sound okay to use here?
The logic isn't broken. The premise follows from the conclusion.
That word
the conclusion follows from the premise.
Yeah, that word is valid.
I understand, but what he said isn't wrong. Okay. What he said is just a more convoluted way
it's
of
not
saying
convoluted.
that the argument
It's
is valid.
but convoluted in a philosophy text talking about elementary fundamental terms.
Well, yeah, Stefan doesn't know academic philosophy.
I would think that you could at least. It's not fine if you market yourself as like the leading fucking philosopher, and he wants to try to engage.
Does he actually say that? I don't watch him that
Yeah,
much.
he talks about. He wants to challenge and talk about all sorts. He wants to engage with philosophy and shit all the time. Doesn't he have like arguments with like Chomsky or some shit on his channel? And he tries to talk about things like determinism, and he wants to like have he wants to be part of like the philosophy discussion. Like, how can you engage with academic literature, or how can you engage
in academic philosophy?
But if you don't even know the vernacular, of course you can't engage with these. I'm never going to be able to have an articulate conversation about high-level music concepts with somebody that doesn't understand the fundamentals of music.
You discuss philosophy on your stream all your time. You said you've never even taken a class.
Sure, but I do my best to read and get the basics down so that I understand the vernacular. That every time I have a discussion on philosophy, I get people emailing me different things like, hey, when you use this word, that's why I know the difference between valid and sound. And I always say when I have discussions of philosophy, I'm trying to speak very carefully. If I say something that isn't ruthlessly correct, feel free to correct me on it. This is why I have tons of conversations on syntax when I talk about philosophy, because it's so important to get it correct. Otherwise, you're spouting meaningless statements like logically sound that don't mean anything.
So I think I understand. So your gripe is that in the philosophy community, sound has a certain meaning, right?
Yes.
When you say an argument is sound, that has a certain meaning.
Yes.
And we all agreed on it.
That is understood ubiquitously throughout all of philosophy. Yes.
Gotcha. And when Stefan says it, it's just wrong or misleading?
When he says logically sound, that's a statement that means nothing. If I were to go and open a dictionary, I could probably piece together what that means.
Well, yeah,
but
that's
in the realm
my point.
But that's not.
We've agreed as a society, like
no, that's not
speakers,
how that works in any academic thing ever. Because you don't
He's
go.
not an academic.
It does, but philosophy is a study.
He doesn't even claim to be an academic.
The study of philosophy. The study of philosophy is a thing. You never ever walk into any kind of liberal arts class. You never walk into any class where like your business teacher, right? Would you ever walk into like a business class where he's talking about some type of corporate interchange or I don't know something, and you bring out your dictionary and you're like, well, the dictionary definition is actually like, well, no, in business we understand it to mean this, or in science we understand this to mean this, or in this we understand, right? In philosophy, the words valid and sound are understood to mean very particular things. It's not this. So to have elementary discussions on fundamental philosophy, things like deductive reasoning or whatever, and then to not know your fucking terms makes me wonder why you're trying to have this conversation. Just move on to the propaganda or whatever agenda you're trying to push. Don't pretend to try to be talking to people and informing them about baseline philosophical stuff. You don't understand it.
All right. Well, I don't know what to say. I still don't think he's wrong. Like, I'm being as rigorous as possible.
But not even, because if somebody were to say that something is logically sound and we were speaking philosophy, I would probably assume that they're using the philosophical definition of sound. The problem, you're being thrown off by the word logically here. Like, the Fedora tip is working so hard. The logically doesn't mean anything. Like, would I ever use any other thing before the word sound here? It remains illogically sound. It remains rationally sound, I guess, is a synonym. Like, what's the point of putting logically before the word sound here?
Maybe I'm being too charitable, but like when he says the structure remains logically sound, I just understand that he's saying the conclusion follows from the premise.
Let's remain logically here, okay? Well, because it's a worthless adjective, and I think you've admitted as much because you can't tell me why it belongs here. Let's say that he said that the structure remains sound. Do you think that that's still an okay statement?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
if he said the argument was sound, I would 100% agree with you. Stefan would be wrong by saying that.
Okay. All right. Any other
It's in a
points?
different context.
Any other point that you want to bring
No.
up? Okay.
No, I'm good.
I love you, buddy.
Yeah, see you, man.